Okay, good morning. So carrying on, we are on Masechet Beitzah. It's our second week now. We are still on the first daf. Again, we're trying to uncover what exactly is this Beitzah which the Mishnah is talking about. Maybe it's a Beitzah that has the stamp of Biachad Nenatzeach. I'm not sure, but in any event, we have this egg, and there are two possibilities as we discussed. It could be a Tanagoret Haomedet La'achila, or it could be a Tanagoret Haomedet Le the shchita, l'achila is the same thing, meaning the chicken is designated to be eaten. In which case, the chicken itself, our default position is that on Yom Tov it's not muktzah, because on Yom Tov you could, in theory, shech the chicken and eat it. On the other hand, if it's a tanagolet ha'omedet legadel beitzim, if it is designated for eggs, so then seemingly we'd have a problem of muktzah. Right, and this is so we're trying to figure out what it is. We got through more or less the first answer in the Gemara. There's going to be another three. So let's see. So again, the Mishnah said, Beitzah shnodav yom tov beit shammai tachel, beit hillel omrim lo tachel. Here is our machloket. Unusually, Beit Shammai are the ones who are lenient here, say that it can be eaten, and Beit Hillel say that it can't be. So what are we talking about? So we saw of Nachman was the first answer. And he said as follows, about halfway down, just go through it quickly, halfway down on the first Talmud. It says, Amar of Nachman, Le'olam b'tanagolet ha'omedet legadel beitzim. Right, he says we're dealing with a chicken who is designated to lay eggs. And we aren't going to make, at this point, a distinction between muktzeh and nolad. And therefore, Beit Shammai, Rabbi Shimon, and Beit Hillel, and Rabbi Yehuda. We said Beit Shammai are the ones who are going to be more lenient regarding both muktzeh and nolad, like Rabbi Shimon, and Beit Hillel are the ones that are going to be stringent, like Rabbi Yehuda. And then the question was, did Rav Nachman really say that? Mi amar Rav Nachman hachi, ve'atnan Beit Shammai omrim magbin ma'ala shulchan atzamot uklipin. Right, we have that Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, dealing with when a person is sitting and eating, and you have peels and bones and things left on the table. Are you allowed to move them or not? Or are they considered muktzah? So in the Mishnah, in our version of the Mishnah, it says that Magbi'in mela shulchan atzmot uklipin, ubeit Hillel omrim mesalek tatavla kula umnala. In other words, Beit Shammai says that you can, and Beit Hillel say no, you have to lift up the whole table and you have to shake it off. I.e., Beit Hillel are the ones that are Beit Hillel are the ones that are more stringent. They say you can't handle it itself. Amar Rav Nachman, anu ein lanu ela Beit Shammai Rabbi Yehuda or Beit Hillel kel Rabbi Shimon. And Rav Nachman turns it around. He says no. He says Beit Shammai are the ones that are more. Beit Shammai are like Rabbi Yehuda, and Beit Hillel are like Rabbi Shimon, which is the opposite of the way that we learned in our Mishnah here in Beitzah. Just one point on this Mishnah in Shabbos, dealing with these bones and things, etc. So Tosfot points out, Tosfot asks a question. Our Mishnah says, Tosfot that says Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel omrim mesalek tatavla kula umnala. You have to lift the whole thing up and shake it off, because the bones and the peels themselves would be muktzeh. So it says Tosfot Teima. What about, we know there's a category of muktzah called basis. If I have an object, if I have a tray or a drawer or something, and I place a muktzah object on top of that from before Shabbat, that is going to be a base for something which is muktzah, and the base itself becomes muktzah. So says Tosfot, if you have here a machloket, why is it that we don't say that the base itself becomes muktzah? So he says, meaning the things that were left on it, the food, the peels that were placed on it, was placed there intentionally. So Tosfot gives three answers. He says, Yesh lomar, the leperush Rabbeinu Tam nicha, the piresh b'Masechet Shabbat, the lo avei basis ledavar asur, ela ksheda'ato la'nicham sham kol hayom. So he says, first of all, we have the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam holds that something only becomes a basis, only becomes muktzah as a basis when you have in mind to place the muktzah object there for the whole day, for the whole of Shabbat, for the whole of Yom Tov, which is not the case over here. He says, Inami, alternatively, Kevan davu sham ochlin, havale basis ledavar ha'asur, u ledavar hamutar. Alternatively, on the table, you don't just have these peels, but you have also food, which is still fit for consumption. And therefore, it is a basis ledavar asur and davar mutar. And the halacha is that such an object would not be muktzah. Right? It's the classic example, which is always brought in terms of basis, is if you have candlesticks on a tray, and then you have the tray becomes muktzah as a basis, because the candlesticks themselves are muktzah on Shabbat. But if you place the chalot as well, so then it's not just a basis ledavar asur, just the candlesticks, but it's a basis ledavar asur v'mutar, and for something permitted as well, and that would be permitted. So that is Tosfot's second answer over here. He says it's a basis ledavar asur u'ledavar mutar v'shali, kedemucha b'perek notel, as we learn later on in the Gemara and Shabbat. Ve'od, also is that these peels, you aren't specifically placing them there on the table. You don't care if they fall somewhere else, to a different place, onto the floor, etc. And therefore that is not a cause for it to be a basis. Okay, so those are Tosfot's three answers. Other Rishonim give different answers as well, but that's just a point about why this table is not considered a basis. So then we saw, going back into the Gemara, the Malach of Nachman. So Rav Nachman answered as follows. He says, Gabei Shabbat desatam lantana Rabbi Shimon titnan mechatchin tadlun lifnei habeima veta nevela lifnei haklavim mukim la lebeit Hillel Rabbi Shimon. He says, when it comes to, Rav Nachman says, I was just going according to Stam Mishnah, right? I held Beit Hillel was the way that the Stam Mishnah was written. And since in Shabbat, in a different place in Shabbat, we see that Stam Mishnah follows Rabbi Shimon, so then who is lenient in Muktzah. So we assume that Beit Hillel also follows Rabbi Shimon and is lenient in Muktzah. They're the cases of this nevela, which became a nevela on Shabbat, and you're allowed to cut it up to feed it to the dogs. We don't say that since it was Muktzah at the beginning of Shabbat, it's now Muktzah for the whole day, which is normally how we actually paskin. But that's how the Stam Mishnah goes. It's lenient like Rabbi Shimon when it comes to Shabbat, and therefore Beit Hillel in Shabbat is lenient. Aval over the Amud, Aval Gabei Yom Tov, the Satam Lantana Rabbi Yehuda. When it comes to Yom Tov, we'll see in Masechet Beitzah. We'll see this later on, that the Stam Mishnah goes like Rabbi Yehuda. There's more stringent when it comes to the dinim of Muktzeh. Ditnan en mevakin eitzim min hakolot velo min hakolah shenishbara b'Yom Tov. Here we're dealing with where we have a pile of beams, different wooden beams. Now over here, this is actually going to be a more stringent form of muktzeh. This is going to be muktzeh mechamat chesron kis. Muktzeh mechamat chesron kis means when there is something, an object which is very valuable, and because of its value, one would not just carry it around, or you wouldn't just use it for something else. You wouldn't use it for anything other than its designated purpose, and that is why it's muktzeh. That is going to be more stringent than, for example, let's say a kli shemelachto le'isur. A kli shemelachto le'isur, something like a pen, where the reason it's muktzeh is because its primary function is something which is forbidden on Shabbat or Yom Tov. So you're allowed to move it letzorech gufo or letzorech mekomo, if you need to use its place or you need to use it in a permitted way. However, something which is muktzeh mechamat chisron kis, something that's because of its value, has its designated purpose, and you wouldn't just move it around, that you would not be allowed to move. And these beams are going to be muktzeh mechamat chisron kis. So the Mishnah said again, ein mevakin eitzim min hakolot velo min hakol asher nishbara b'Yom Tov, that we don't if you have these beams in a pile, so they are muktzeh mechamat chesron kis. You can't go and use them for firewood, even if says the Mishnah, even if one of them broke, and therefore it can't be used for its original purpose. Nonetheless, because it was muktzeh when Yom Tov came in, it's still going to be muktzeh throughout Yom Tov. So that's clearly the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, not the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which we saw regarding Shabbat, and here the Stam Mishnah goes in a different direction. So that is the answer to the contradiction in Rav Nachman. Now we're on the fourth line of Daf Bet Amud Bet, halfway through the line. It says, Michti, man sat meile matnitin. Rabbi, says the Gemara, now we have a problem. Because who arranged the Mishnayot in such a fashion? It was Rabbi. And he arranged the Stam Mishnah with, in a way to contradict. I understand Rav Nachman was following Stam Mishnah. But why did Rabbi incorporate a contradiction into the way he arranged the Stam Mishnah? Have a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Man satam lan matnitin, Rabbi. Says, Who sider ha-Mishnah? Rabbi arranged the Mishnah. U'shela'ah divrei chacham. V'yashru beinav. Right? How did Rabbi arrange the Mishnah? The different Tanaim all had different understandings, different opinions, different statements, different expositions. And when he saw the words of a particular Chacham that he thought were correct, right? He incorporated them. Many times the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Meir Omer. Sometimes it doesn't say that. Why? It's always someone who said it. But Rabbi put it in that way. He says, he did not mention the name of the Tana who said it. So that it won't sound like, oh, it was only the opinion of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, whatever it is. But it doesn't sound like an individual opinion. It makes it sound like that's the mainstream opinion. And therefore halacha should follow that way. That is the idea. That's what Stam Mishnah means. So why did Rabbi change the Stam Mishnah between Shabbat and between Yom Tov? Ma'ishna b'Shabbat the satam lan Rabbi Shimon, or ma'ishna b'Yom Tov the satam lan Rabbi Yehuda. Why on Shabbat we have Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Shimon, and why on Yom Tov do we have Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda? Amri, we say the following: Shabbat chamira v'lo ati lezalzule ba satam lan Rabbi Shimon. Shabbat, which is chamira, Shabbat, which is more stringent, i.e., there are 39 malachot, you can't perform any of the malachot on Shabbat. Therefore, lo ati lezalzule ba. We're not worried people will come to disrespect it, disregard it. Satam lan Rabbi Shimon. Therefore, comes to muktzah, it's a little bit more lenient, not a problem. Rabbi Shimon the maker. But Yom Tov, however, the kill, Yom Tov is lenient. People say, what's Yom Tov? Yom Tov's not Shabbos. Yom Tov you can cook, you can carry, you can light fire, you can do all sorts of things. Right? And therefore we're worried that on Yom Tov, the kill, v'ati lezalzule, and people will come to disregard Yom Tov completely. They'll say, you can do all these things on Yom Tov, so what's the problem with muktzah? All the more so. Kal v'chom. No. Satam lan Rabbi Yehuda the machmir. Therefore, instead of muktzah, the Stam Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda, who is more stringent, so that people won't come to disregard Yom Tov. Okay. Now we say like this. So that's a little bit of a digression, explaining that the opinion of Rav Nachman really can be the opinion of Rav Nachman, and as a result of that, explaining the contradiction in the Mishnayot. But what we said was that our Mishnah is dealing with a Beitzah, that the whole thing about the whole machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is about muktzah, and it's a Beitzah omeret legadel Beitzim. And since it's a Beitzah legadel Beitzim, according to Beit Hillel, Tanagolet omeret legadel Beitzim, right? Since according to Beit Hillel, both the Tanagolet and the Beitzah will be muktzah, according to Beit Shammai, neither the Tanagolet nor the Beitzah would be muktzah. So now says the Gemara as follows. It says, B'mayu kimta. So we have now established, again, we're about 8-10 lines down. B'mayu kimta. We've established our Mishnah, according to Rav Nachman, B'tarnagolet ha'omedet legadel beitzim, that we're dealing with a chicken that's designated to lay eggs. Umishum muktzeh. And therefore the reason for prohibition is because of muktzeh. So if that's the case, adamiflege b'beitzah, liflegu b'tarnagolet. Right? If the whole case is muktzah, and essentially the egg is just following on the din of the chicken, so tell us the language of the Mishnah should be that Beit Hillel and tell us that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai argued about a chicken. They argued about muktzah. If that's what you're trying to teach me, you're trying to teach me they argue whether the chicken is muktzah or not. So say it. Why do we need to go into the egg? We'll see for the other reasons that there's something unique about the egg, the case of the egg, which is not the case of the chicken, and that's why there's a machloket. But according to this explanation, there's no difference, and therefore there's seemingly no reason. It should have been called Masechet Hanagolet, not Masechet Beitzah. Right? That's what comes out of this. So says the Gemara like this. So leodiacha kochan de Beit Shammai de v'nolad shali. Okay, to teach you the power, to teach you how far Beit Shammai go in this instance, to say that they would allow it even with nolad. In other words, between the Tarnagolet and the Beitzah, there is going to be, which those are two cases, but each one has a certain chiddush. There is a chiddush by the Beitzah, which is as follows. I would say, I understand if you had taught me just about the chicken. So I would say, I understand that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel have an argument about muktzah. I understand that Beit Shammai says the chicken is not muktzah, and Beit Hillel says the chicken is muktzah. But when it comes to the egg is going to be nolad. Right? We already saw this. There was the Gemara in the first time would had such a havamina that you might hold by muktzah, that you, even if you don't hold by muktzah, you do hold by nolad. We rejected that, but there was such a havamina. So it says to teach you. If you hadn't taught me that it was about the egg, I would have said, okay, the machloket is only about the tarnagolet, but surely when it comes to nolad, that's a whole different category, and there Beit Shammai will agree with Beit Hillel. Right, so leodiacha kochan de Beit Shammai de benolad shali. So says the Gemara, wait a minute, if you want to teach me to the extent that Beit Shammai argues, well, you could have taught me about the chicken, and you would have told me the extent to which Beit Hillel argues, right? Why didn't you say that? He says liflego b'tarnagolet leodiacha kochan de Beit Hillel de v'muktzah asli. Again, you could read it exactly the opposite way. You could say, now the Mishnah has told me about the Beitzah. So I understand the Beitzah is nolad. So therefore, that is a machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai holds that it's permitted, because Beit Shammai don't hold muktzah, they don't hold nolad. Beit Hillel say, this is nolad, and therefore it's going to be asur. But when it comes to a tarnagolet, okay, there we can be more lenient. That's not nolad, and therefore Beit Hillel would allow it. So whether you teach me about the egg or whether you teach me about the chicken, there's a chiddush, either this way to Beit Shammai or this way to Beit Hillel. So we haven't solved the problem. Now you'll say, wait a minute. The chiddush that you're teaching me by this way is about a leniency for Beit Shammai. Koach de hetera adif. Three very, very famous words, which come here in the Gemara and other places, used in many contexts. Koach de hetera adif. You're going to tell me that you should specifically teach, this is what we originally said, you should teach me about the egg, to teach me that Beit Shammai are going to allow it. Why? Because koach de hetera adif. It's better to teach about the heter. What does it mean, koach de hetera adif? Says Rashi, the hetera adif leis. Rashi seemingly has a slightly different gives on the text of the Gemara, but he says tov lo lashmenu koach divrei matir, meaning it's more important, it's more significant, I guess. There is more of a chiddush to teach us the words of the one who is lenient rather than the one who is machmir. Why shul somech al shmuato, to show you that the one who is lenient relies on his teaching, on his words. Ve'no yarei latir, is not afraid to permit it. Aval koach osrin eina reya. He says, showing that something is asur, that's not going to be a proof. Right? Anybody can be machmir. Anybody can say it's asur. That's easy. Anybody, right? When I say something's asur, you can say it's asur. To prove that something is mutar, that's what takes. You have to have the knowledge, you have to have the skills, you have to be able to. To give a psak of mutar is much more difficult than to give a psak of asur. So to show you that the svara, how far it goes of Beit Shammai, then it's the same mutar. So in other words, it makes more sense because of koach te'eter adif, says the Gemara, makes more sense to teach us about the egg, lodiacha kochad Beit Shammai, to teach you that Beit Shammai says even by nolad it's mutar. If you told me about the chicken, to say that even by Beit Hillel it's asur, well, anybody can say it's asur. It's more of a chiddush. It's more important to show me the chiddush of Beit Shammai that they are matir ben nolad. So now says the Gemara, okay, but even if you'll say that chiteim koach te'eter adif, so v'niflog b'tavayu. So you have a double machloket. Why can't you say the following? Tarnagolet haomedet legadel beitzim, hi ubeitzata. Beit Shammai omrim tachel, ubeit Hillel omrim lo tachel. All the Gemara had to do, all the Mishnah had to do was add in one or two extra words. It could have said, right? It could have taught us about the chicken and the egg. Yes, the Gemara's now suggested language is Tarnagolet haomedet legadel beitzim. If you have a chicken which is designated for eggs, he ubeitzata. Instead of saying Beitzah, say he ubeitzata, both the chicken and the egg. Beit Shammai omrim tachel, Beit Hillel omrim lo tachel. Right? Beit Shammai say it can be eaten, Beit Hillel say no, it can't be eaten. So that is the kasha on Rav Nachman. The Gemara does not give an answer. The Gemara is now going to give other suggestions as to how we resolve the Mishnah. So we don't know. Rav Nachman does not give us an answer to that question. But essentially, that's what it says. Rav Nachman said the whole issue here is one of muktzah. The kushya which the Gemara has on that is if it's an issue of muktzah, so it's the same issue for the Tarnagolet and for the Beitzah. And why should the Mishnah just talk about the Beitzah? Why doesn't it talk about the Tarnagolet and Beitzah? Now, Tosfot points out over here, right? You see Tosfot just towards the end of the narrow lines, it says v'niflug betarvayu. This svara of the Gemara is a little bit strange. He says Taima. Right. This is not the only place where we have many times throughout Shas. You have a machloket between Tanaim or machloket between Amoraim maybe, and the machloket is about one particular case. The machloket applies to another case as well, but the Gemara gives you the more extreme case to show you koach te'teradif, to show you that one of the sides would say even this is permitted, so too that case would be permitted as well. So we don't say in every case, teach us both cases or teach us all the cases. We just say koach te'teradif. That's why when the Gemara says, chitema, and if you'll say koach te'teradif, well, that's a legitimate svara. So says Tosfot, says every place in Shas where we say koach te'teradif, you could come and say, no, we'll just list both cases. We don't say. He says, yesh lo mardachi parich. What we say over here is as follows. This case is unique. Why? Because if you were to teach about the chicken and the egg, you're really just adding in one word. You're really adding in one word, so the Mishnah can do that. So that's why we asked the question. It's not going to take a lot. It's not going to be much longer. Generally speaking, it's not possible. Generally speaking, you'd have to mention all the cases, and that we're not going to do. That's not the way the Mishnah or the Gemara sets things out. Okay. So that is answer number one in terms of what we're talking about in our Mishnah. Now we get to answer number two. Answer number two, which is going to be unique to the egg. So Amar Rabbi. Rabbi says the following. Le'olam b'tarnagolet haomedet la'achila. He says, no, so we go back. He says, really, we are dealing with a tarnagolet, a chicken which is designated not for eggs, but for eating. Okay, so we tried that already. We tried to say that, and we rejected it. Why? We said if the chicken is designated for eating, so then it's not muktzeh according to anybody. And the food the egg which comes out, it's like uchla de efrat. We said it's like food. You're separating food. You're cutting up a loaf of bread. So why? So the question was, why, if it's a tarnagolet haomedet la'achila, why should Beit Hillel prohibit? So he says the case is not just an ordinary yom tov. Now let's get complicated. He says we're dealing with a chicken which is designated for eating, and when it says on Yom Tov, it doesn't just mean any Yom Tov, but it means Yom Tov shechal liot achal Shabbat. It means Yom Tov which falls out on Motzei Shabbat, no, on Yom Rishon. Okay, so what's the problem? Yom Tov shechal liot achal Shabbat askinan umishum hachana. It's because of hachana, because of preparation. What does hachana mean? This is going to be a big discussion amongst the Rishonim. But he says like this, says Kasavar Rabba, Kol Beitzah demityalda ha'idna me'etmol g'malala. He says if the egg is laid now, the egg is laid today, that is a sign that actually yesterday it finished growing inside the chicken's body, meaning the day that the egg is laid, the previous day is when it had finished its preparation, right? And Rabba Latame, Rabba goes according to his reason. Dama Rabba, Mai dichtiv aya b'yom shishi v'echinu et asher yaviu. He's explaining now where he gets this concept of hachana, of preparation, from in the first place. He brings from the pasuk dealing with the man. It says when the man would fall on Yom HaShishi, on Friday, v'hechinu et asher yaviu. They would have to prepare that which they would bring, that which they would collect. Chol mechin leShabbat, v'chol mechin leYom Tov, v'en Yom Tov mechin leShabbat, v'en Shabbat mechina leYom Tov. In other words, this preparation that took place of this of the man, of the food, which was going to be for the Sudat Shabbat, that had to be performed the day before on Yom Shishi, that had to be performed on Chol. So that's what Rabbi says. He says Chol can prepare for Shabbat, and Chol you can prepare for Yom Tov, but you cannot prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbat, and you can't prepare on Shabbat for Yom Tov. So now you'll all come and ask me immediately, what do you mean in Yom Tov Mechin Shabbat? We know that we do. We perform an Eruv Tavshilin, and we can perform preparation from Yom Tov to Shabbat. We will get to that later in terms of specifics of how that works. But let's try and understand a little bit what is this hachana which Rabbi is talking about. And the reason that this egg is going to be forbidden is because it's this hachana which takes place. So Rashi here says, L'tamei d'amar Rabba. So interesting. He says b'psachim v'yalif mehacha demuktzeh deoraita. So this is not the way we pass him, but it says Rashi seems to be according to this opinion of Rabba that this hachana is required from the Torah, and that hachana is required in order to make it not muktzeh. So he holds that the idea of muktzeh, could even be deoraita. So he quotes from the pasuk, and what does it mean? V'chinu et asher yaviu. What is this hachana? Says Rashi, echinu v'hizminu. He says echinu here does not mean cooking, but echinu it means like v'hizminu. In other words, to designate. In other words, we said at the beginning the whole concept of muktzeh, something which is muktzeh, something that has not been designated to be used on Shabbat or Yom Tov. In order for the preparation that you have to do in order to use this egg or use this food for your meal, is that before Shabbat comes in, it has to be designated. So for example, a person looks at the crops or the food and he says, I'm going to eat from this tomorrow. That's the designation. In other words, it's not hachana bi'adayim. It's not that you pick it up and you cook it and you boil it or whatever. No, it's that you designate it in your mind. If you meant as actual physical preparation of the food, and you were saying that you would have to cook or bake it that day, so that we already have written. That's written explicitly in a different place regarding the man. It says, right, that which needs to be baked should be baked, that which needs to be cooked should be cooked. But over here, where it says echinu, it means el hazmana b'peh. It means that that has to be designated in thought or verbally. It says on the sixth day, on Friday, right? V'stam shishi cholhu. Generally speaking, shishi means chol. V'achshav alachmana lesudat Shabbat sheazminena mibod yom uvachol. Now, in other words, the meal of Shabbat was given importance. It's given significance by the Torah, and therefore it has to be designated. Rashi is going to explain afterwards, because if you say it needs designation from Chol to Shabbat, and you can't have designation from Shabbat to Chol, he'll explain afterwards, how could you say, what if an egg was laid stam on Yom Rishon? So you say it was prepared on Shabbat, the designation therefore took place on Shabbat, but how could you eat it on Chol? So he says, for Yom Chol, the Sudah, that doesn't need designation. The Sudah in Yom Chol is not significant. But the Sudah of Shabbat is something that has significance. That's what he says here. Shabbat, and therefore, you have to designate it, you have to prepare for it already the day before. So, no, we'll see more tomorrow. We'll go into the next few Rashis and understand a bit deeper. But essentially what Rabbi is saying is, the problem is this egg is going to be muktzeh. Why? Because it was completed on Shabbat. Because the preparation was made on Shabbat, and you cannot prepare on Shabbat for Yom Tov. Therefore, when the egg was laid on Yom Tov, which is after Shabbat, it's going to be asur. All that is according to Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai doesn't hold by this. What if you're all asking? Our minds are racing ahead. What if then it is just an ordinary Yom Tov, which does not come after Shabbat? What would the din there be? And why did the Mishnah not tell us? The Mishnah just said Yom Tov. It didn't say Yom Tov shechal achar Shabbat. Okay, so the Gemara will address that, and we'll have to answer those questions. I can for today, and hope to see you all tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lovely show.
Thank you, Rabbi. You will.
Yom Tov.